Good morning, everyone. Everyone's happy with their fruit breakfast this morning. We had a vegetable breakfast this morning, which we explained was the best when you're breaking a fast. But this morning we introduce you to some of the fruits, the millet, the lentils, and I'm going to explaining this morning why some of the things that we're giving you is so good to give you. Because it's important to know why, isn't that true? Yeah. Should be on the tip of our lips. Newton's third law of motion: to every action there's an equal and an opposite reaction. We all always should know why. So we're going to spend our whole day today, our whole morning, on food. And aren't there a lot of different messages on food? Carbs are good. No, actually they're bad. Fat is bad. Actually it's good. Do you ever think, when are they going to make up their minds? Mm-hmm. How long have we been on the planet? Well, let's take the lowest common denominator. As a Bible-believing Christian, I believe was about 10,000 years, I think. Haven't they worked it out yet? What would be the signs that someone had worked it out? A group of people had worked it out. Healthy, long life, quality of life. Mm-hmm. And there are people on the planet that do experience that. I don't know if you've heard of the book Blue Zone. Mm-hmm. You have Time magazine, I think it was 15 years ago, did also an article on Blue Zone. They looked at, we're going to particularly look at three groups of people that live long lives, commonly into their hundreds, quality of life, and the journalist actually interviewed and followed a lot of them. And one was the Okinawans, which are Japanese. I think it's a Japanese island, very hard for McDonald's to get to islands. And there's a picture of a Okinawan woman, 85, collecting seaweed in the shallow part around the island. Also the Sardinians, which is an Italian group of people, and he was climbing hills, almost mountains, for this 90-year-old man to check his goats, and he could hardly keep up with him. Now the third group of people were the Seventh-day Adventists, and they're a group of people that commonly have much better health. So the three common denominators with these three groups of people were they're always active, and tomorrow we're going to be looking at exercise. Number two, they eat food in its natural state. A lot of them are vegetarians. The ones that eat meat, it's not a large part of their diet. And the third common denominator was they're very social. You know, we're social people, aren't we? And when we're social people, our mind is not so much concentrated on us, but on other people. Interesting that they were the three common denominators. So we're going to look at the social aspect, the emotional aspect on Saturday morning, which is 2 more days. Tomorrow morning we're going to be looking at the activity part, but today we're going to look at the food part. I'm going to come at what is the best food to eat from the pH balance. pH means potential hydrogen. And when you dissolve acid in a solution, it gives off hydrogen ions. When you dissolve alkaline in solution, it gives off hydroxy ions. So the pH scale is potential hydrogen, potential hydroxy. So I'll do it in everyday language now. It's the acid-alkaline balance. So up one end, we have acid, and up the other end of the acid-alkaline scale, we have alkaline. And in the middle, we've got neutral. Neutral is neither acid nor alkaline. So the acid scale, it's 0, alkaline, it's 14, and in the middle, 7 is neutral. Blood has a reading on the pH scale, and blood's reading on the pH scale is between 7.35 and 7.4. It will always be within that range. If blood pH does go up to 8, that person will go into a coma and die of alkalosis. If blood pH drops down to 7.22, that person will go into a coma and die of acidosis. So there cannot be much variation there, and we don't need to worry about the pH of our blood, because there are two organs that are constantly keeping it within that range. One is your lungs, And this explains why you start breathing very deeply when you exercise. We don't choose to breathe deeply, do we? But when we're getting to the top of that hill, you're starting to breathe very deeply, especially if you run up the hill. Well, why does that happen? Well, the cells need more oxygen. Remember, more oxygen gives you a better delivery of fuel. Plus, as the oxygen and the glucose are being burnt, they're giving off carbon dioxide. Excuse me. They're giving off carbon dioxide, and that has to be got rid of. Because if it doesn't, the carbon dioxide builds up in the blood, and that creates a more acid environment. So that is why we start breathing deeply. So deep breathing helps to keep the balance of the pH in the blood as it should be. The other organ is your kidneys. Your kidneys do this in a fascinating way. Proverbs 14 verse 6 states, "Knowledge is easy to him that understands." Let's go to the smallest unit in the kidney, which is a little nephron. It's a little filtering unit. It's called the Bowman's capsule, and out of the Bowman's capsule the filtrate comes out. And then the filtrate weaves around these tubules and is eliminated via the bladder. So what happens with these little filtering units is the blood comes in, weaves around the filtering units, and then the blood weaves around the tubules. So let me show you where in the kidneys are these little filtering units. So the medulla is the middle part, the cortex is the outside, and all the little filtering units basically sit on the outside, and then the tubules weave down like this, then into the ureter, into the bladder, and out via the urethra comes the urine. So why am I talking about the kidneys with pH? Let's say the pH of the blood is getting too acid. Well, it's in this area of the blood going through the tubules that the pH is tested. You see, we filter out, we only filter out 1.5 litres of urine a day, but out of these filtering units, 1,800 litres is filtered out. So where does that go? There's a reabsorption here. And it's in the reabsorption area that pH is being monitored. So let's say the pH of the blood is getting too acid, and we'll look at why that is in a moment. Then extra acid is dropped into the tubules to be urinated out. But let's say the pH of the blood is going too alkaline. Well, it is here that extra acid is pulled back out of the tubules and into the blood. So that is how the kidneys are constantly monitoring and balancing, if necessary, the pH of the blood. Let me give you a story to illustrate. We had a lady, she was coming to do our programs a few years ago now. She rang up Saturday night and she said, "I'm very worried about coming to your retreat." I said, "Why is that?" She said, "Well, I'm about to go on dialysis. I'm 57. My legs are swollen, and I'm worried if when I come to your retreat and go through the detox, I'll get worse. Do you have a doctor there?" I said, "We don't, but we will keep a close eye on you. We can adjust as we go, and there is a hospital an hour away if you need that." And if someone would say to my husband, "Do you have a doctor there at your retreat?" you know what his answer is? "No, and we don't want one." You see, we're not doctors. We're just lifestyle coaches, teaching people how to be their own doctors. Yes, go to your doctor. Yes, go to your specialist and see what he says. And what can you do with his advice? You can take it or leave it. That's why God's given us this sound mind to consider these things. I said, we'll closely monitor you. The lady who rang me Saturday night, she said, "Oh, all right. Never had anyone come reluctantly to our health retreat before." I found out why later. Her mother and her sister had paid for her and were pushing her to go. So she came. Early that morning, I was praying. I said, "Father in heaven, what do I do with this lady? She's about to go on dialysis. And then God put into my mind a few things. Remember that early morning? My celery was going to seed. Did you know that celery is an excellent kidney herb? My parsley was going to seed. Did you know that parsley is an excellent kidney herb? Couch grass is all through my yard and trying to get into my garden. I'm always pulling it out. Another kidney herb. So I gathered all of this, and what I did was I made her up a litre or a quart of tea every day with the celery seed. I just put the tops in. And I put some ginger in there to make it taste a little bit better so it didn't taste like grass. As I'm consulting with this lady, I discovered that she only drinks 2, maybe 3 glasses of water a day. She would say, look at my legs. There's too much water in my body now. Can you see that reasoning? It's because she's dehydrated that the body is actually unable to handle that water. So what happens in this reabsorption here is not only pH is balanced, but so is sodium and water levels in the body. So when that goes down, can you see why the legs swell? Her blood pressure was high. Blood pressure is also monitored here. She was having 3 cups of coffee a day. She's a nurse, and nurses drink a lot of coffee as a rule. Coffee dehydrates you even more. I discovered she had a gluten intolerance. And because she was a nurse eating a lot of fast food, with lots of cookies and sandwiches on the run, she also had a hormonal imbalance. She said to me, I will not be able to walk with the guests in the morning. I said, that's right, not with those legs. But what I'd like you to do is I'd like to get on the little rebounder for 1 minute every hour, just doing this, just this. That's called the health bounce. Anyone can do that. And that will stimulate the lymphatic system to start dispersing the fluid in the legs. I said, I want you to drink a litre of water a day and a litre of this tea. And that was far more than she was usually drinking. But I said, you are never to drink a whole glass at once. You have to drink it little by little by little by little. And the kidneys can cope a lot better with that. So Monday morning, she did not walk with the guests. Tuesday morning, she walked with the guests. Her legs had gone down by half. She was so excited. She hadn't seen them like that for weeks. She was a very happy lady when she went home. We wrote a program for her to continue. She emailed me 3 months later. She said, I don't have to go on dialysis. Isn't that incredible? I was talking to a nurse. She said, I've never heard such a thing. Who healed her? The body. Nature alone is the effective healer. And how much better can it perform its task when given the right conditions? She said, I've had a liver function test, and my liver function, the test is the best it's been for years. She said, my inflammatory markers have come back to normal. She said, I feel better than I have felt for 10 years. I'm going back to full-time work. I've lost 10 kilos. That would be 20 pounds in weight. This is in 3 months. She was an excited lady. In fact, her mother and her sister say that she thanks them every day. But when she was coming in the first day, she was not thanking them. She was saying, why have I done this? So simple, and yet often bypassed. So you can see that the kidneys not only filter the blood, they play an important role in what's called homeostasis, in balancing the body, in balancing the pH, in balancing the sodium and water balance in the body, in balancing blood pressure. I don't think you'll ever look at your kidneys the same again, will you? So you can see why the kidneys are the other organ that help to balance the pH. Even though the blood cannot change, the pH of the cell can. The pH of the cell should be approximately 6.5. That's very slightly acid, and there is a reason for that. The most acidic substance is sulfuric acid, and sulfuric acid travels at the speed of light. The most alkaline mineral is calcium, and on the scale of speed, calcium doesn't even move. The hydroponic gardener, he's always testing the pH of the water that his plants grow in, because if the water goes too acid, the roots burn. If the water goes too alkaline, he doesn't get the speed of uptake of minerals out of the water and into the plant. So you can see that very slightly acid is important for the speed of all those little chemical reactions that are, millions of them are happening right now. Have you ever had a swimming pool? You have to test the pH every morning, because if the water goes to acid, the pipes corrode. If the water goes to alkaline, algae grows on the pipes. So just as for the hydroponic gardener, and just as for the swimming pool, the pH of the human body is important, because at different pHs, diseases grow. And at different pHs, it's very hard for disease to grow. So let's have a look at that. 2.6. This is where Coca-Cola sits. It's a killer. It's toxic. I was in the Fiji Islands and I was lecturing to some school children there. This is about 10 years ago. And the principal of the school said, I know the Coca-Cola factory. And he said, and I know they clean their machinery with the Coca-Cola. Bit scary, isn't it? The gardener, he aims for a soil pH of 6.5. The Bible says we come from dust, we go back to dust, we're dust. The dust of the ground or the soil and the cell pH, very similar. But in a cellular pH of 5.5, this is where disease thrives, especially yeasts, funguses, and cancer. I have a lot of books in my library at home from doctors, professors, scientists, naturopaths, naturopathic doctors who are having success helping their patients to conquer cancer. And so I read them all, and I want to find the three common denominators. Cancer loves acid. Cancer also loves no oxygen. So knowing those things, it makes a lot of sense to alkalize the tissues. And even though there's the drop of only 1 point, the drop of 1 point means 60% less oxygen available at the cellular level. The other thing cancer loves is sugar. So these are the three common denominators I find. And so when people come to us wanting help to conquer cancer, you see what we do? We suggest a diet that's highly alkalizing. We suggest ways to oxygenate the body. In fact, some health retreats have hyperbaric chambers. Have you heard of those? We have one, and it puts oxygen in under pressure. And we also greatly eliminate the glucose, the sugars going into the body. Now, we have had a few people come to our retreat that have had bone spurs. Do you ever wonder where the bone spur comes from? So there's a bone spur on the wrist. You go to the doctor, he'll say, and you'll say, what is that? He'll say, it's a bone spur. And then you'll say, but why is it on my bone and not in my bone? Because it's a calcium deposit, and he'll acknowledge that. And often the answer is, we don't know. But I'm about to show you why that calcium deposit goes on the bone and not in the bone. Let's say we meet someone who's breaking every law. They're breathing in bad air, they never go in the sunshine, they're living on the stimulants, which are all acid, they go to bed too late, they never exercise, don't have time, they're on the high-carb diet. Remember that diet we had there the other day? All acid-forming foods. They don't drink water because they don't like the taste. I've never had a cow not like the taste. Never had a horse not like the taste. Why would humans not like the taste? Because they've tasted sweet other things. Isn't that true? In fact, Joshua was saying, I think, introduce your children to vegetables and they'll eat vegetables. But if you introduce them to cakes and pastries and cookies, they're not going to eat their vegetables. It's exactly the same with water. Stress, worry, anxiety. Now this creates a very acid environment in the body. And the body's quickly trying to deal with that. And the blood pH is getting a little acid. It's going up to What's going down, sorry, 7.35, 34, 33, we're dropping. And remember, down to 7.22 is death. So very quickly, the last resort buffer system is called on. Calcium, the most alkaline minerals pulled out of the bones in a form of calcium phosphate, comes into the blood, immediately helps to bring the balance back. 7.34, 35, we're safe. But now at a cost. We now have free calcium excess floating through the bloodstream. What's the body going to do with that? It'll dump it on the bones as a spur. It'll dump it in the kidneys, kidney stones, gallbladder, gallstones, even maybe a little bit of a build-up on the eyes. What's that called? Your cataracts. They're all illustrations of Newton's third law of motion. To every action, there's an equal and an opposite reaction. I read this statement in an old book that I'm about to quote to you, and I've put it in my book. This law never ceases to act as nature's equaliser, setting in motion compensatory forces to remedy every imbalance. Isn't that the true cause of disease? You now know, though, how to get rid of a bone spur, is that right? Castor oil. The good news is castor oil will never break down your bone, because remember Psalm 104 verse 14, that God gave herbs for the service of man. The castor oil comes in and says, where would you like me? What would you like me to do? Oh, the unnatural formations, that's what it'll break up, the bone spurs. So I say, well, fibroids and cysts and tumours, they're easy compared to the bone spur, and yet the castor oil can break up a bone spur. But what I'd like to look at now is what foods have an acid effect and what foods have an alkaline effect. And this will enable you to ensure that you're having a more alkaline diet. So we're going to have a look at alkaline foods and we're going to look at acid foods. And you might be surprised to see that the first alkaline food I'm putting up here is the humble lemon. And you might say, no, the lemon's acid. It is. And it's acid where it should be. There's only one part in the body that should be acid. You know where that is? Stomach. It must be acid. If someone says, I've got a very acid stomach, I say, praise God. Because if you don't have an acid stomach, you can't break your proteins down. How do you know it's acid? Well, it's sore. Well, you shouldn't feel it. I can't feel it. It means you haven't got a thick mucosa lining on the stomach. We're going to look at water tomorrow, and that's made up of water. Maybe it's because you're dehydrated. Remember, you've got to investigate. I gave a presentation last night to a group, and we had questions at the end. And one question was, what can I do for high blood pressure? And I said, well, I can't answer that in 30 seconds, but you can go to my YouTube lecture. What can we do for this? I said, well, all depends on why it's... What can I do for my sore finger? All depends on why the finger's sore. So you've got to investigate. So I actually referred them to lectures I have online where they can investigate. Everyone wants a quick fix. Sorry, there aren't any. The quickest fix I know would have to be your hot and cold. Your hot and cold treatments. You can get relief very quickly with your hot and cold water treatments. No, the lemon is acid where it should be. That's why you'll find that most of our salad dressings have lemon in them. But when it is broken down in the gut and the minerals are dispersed and absorbed into the blood and thus to the tissues, it has an alkaline effect. Because the lemon is high in the alkaline minerals, which is sodium and potassium, calcium, magnesium and iron. These are the alkaline minerals, and the lemon is high in the alkaline minerals. Don't you love the lemon? Every home should have a lemon tree. And if you're in a unit, you can have a lemon tree in a pot on your veranda. Dark green leafy vegetables are also alkaline forming. Dark green leafy vegetables we should be eating every day. That's your kale, that's your parsley, that's your, what you call them, collard greens. Do you know, I've never seen collard greens in Australia. You can tell I'm in Alabama. They're a popular food here, but we do have spinach and silver beet, kale. We should be eating something from the dark green family of vegetables every single day. And if you don't, you really should have a dose of green barley or super greens. Also vegetables. Vegetables have an alkaline effect. But there is a question mark with vegetables. I'm putting a question mark here because for some people these have an alkaline effect and sometimes an acid effect. There's the tomato and bell pepper, or in Australia we call that capsicum. Also eggplant, and some countries call this aubergine. And last is the potato. Now this is not the sweet potato. The sweet potato is actually not a potato. The sweet potato is a yam. I'm referring to the English potato or the Irish potato. This is the nightshade group of vegetables, and for some people they have an acid effect, and for some people they have an alkaline effect. Let me tell you what I have found with me. My mother died at 51, a cripple in a wheelchair with rheumatoid arthritis. I have strong inherited genes to that way. And my body says to me, a little tomato now and then. My body says to me, don't even touch the bell pepper. What happens if I touch it? Oh, it repeats on me all afternoon and my energy just goes. So I say, I'm hearing your body and I don't eat it. The eggplant, I have a little eggplant now and then, maybe twice a month. Potato, my husband's an Irishman. Potatoes must be in every main meal, so I have it probably most days. That's what my body tells me. I don't know what your body will tell you. Now, I could have 10 professors in front of me saying, this is ridiculous, Barbara. The bell pepper is a very good vegetable. It is high in antioxidants and vitamin C's. You should be eating it. Who am I going to listen to? I've got to live in this body. That's why the fine-tuning is yours. No man on the planet can tell you the fine-tuning. Only your body can. We had one lady who conquered her arthritis. Isn't that good news? Yeah. She conquered her arthritis by stopping the nightshades. It appears if you have an inflammatory condition in the body, the nightshades will feed that inflammation. She conquered her arthritis. She was in her 70s. Even her swollen joints came down. Isn't that good news? She said to me, do you think I could start eating that now? I said, you could try. Your body will quickly tell you. She told me later that her body lets her have half a tomato every second day. Her body does not let her have the bell pepper. Her body lets her have a little eggplant now and then, and she has potato a couple of times a week. She said, my body's happy with that. One lady said to me, I can have the green bell pepper but not the red. Another lady said, well, I can have the red and not the green. Another lady said, I can have the raw and not the cooked. And another lady said, well, I can have the cooked and not the raw. I find that my body's very happy with cayenne pepper, and yet that's from the capsicum of the bell pepper family. I think perhaps the medicinal properties of the cayenne pepper maybe far outweigh for me the reaction. So the choice is yours, the question mark's there. If you love this food, if you have no reaction and no arthritis, enjoy. When you cook the tomato with an oil, and I think you'll agree with me, olive oil and tomatoes go very nice. They almost hand in hand together. And you look at Lebanese food, Italian food, there's a lot of tomato and olive oil cooking. When it's cooked with an oil, it releases a plant chemical called lycopene. Lycopene is from the fat-soluble family, and that's another reason why we should be eating a little oil with our meals, because it helps release the fat-soluble vitamins. Lycopene is a potent antioxidant, and it has the ability to reduce the inflammation of the prostate gland, so that's good news, isn't it? So every man over the age of 40 should be having a cooked tomato and olive oil dish maybe 3 or 4 times a week. That's not hard. Lovely base for your chickpeas, your tomatoes, it is tomatoes. for your, in fact, isn't that Mexican, your kidney beans to have with your tacos, or your tacos, I think you call them. Lima beans and lentils and soy are the 3 alkaline forming legumes. For your grains, the millet is alkaline. We had millet this morning. It's a delicious grain, isn't it? I'm sure you can understand when I said it needs to be dressed. It's basically a bland grain, but it's very nice with the stewed apple and the pear cream and the sprinkles on top. Or it's also very nice if you have it with savoury, your lentils. Quinoa. I think we'll be having quinoa at another breakfast time. These are alkaline grains, but they're also gluten-free grains, so that's made them very popular. Amaranth. Amaranth is a grain that's not very well known. I think the Aztecs, traditionally they've eaten the quinoa and the amaranth. It's a very tiny grain, and when you cook it, it goes like a lump of glue. But what I often do when my grandsons are with us, because they like a porridge, I'll put a little amaranth with the millet, or I'll put a little amaranth with the quinoa, or if they have oats, I'll put a little amaranth with the oats. So that's quite nice. Spelt. Spelt and kamut are wild hybrids of the original wheat. So let me give you the wheat story. The original wheat that God made is called Enkenhorn, or some call it just Enkhorn. And that original wheat had a very fragile protein or gluten structure. It is not sure when, but they estimate a couple of 1,000 years ago, Enkenhorn did a wild hybrid with a field grass and came up with the Emma strain of wheat. Its structure, its protein or gluten structure is not as fragile, but it's still fairly fragile. And in the 1950s, it was the Emma strain of wheat that was put through intensive crossbreeding, and it came up with the hybridized wheat that we know today. That hybridization of the wheat created an incredibly complex gluten or protein structure. Yesterday we looked at the starch that was changed, but today we're looking at how the hybridization process changed the gluten or the protein structure, and it's almost only a cast iron gut that can break down that very complex protein or gluten structure. That explains why so many people are gluten intolerant today. You look at the timeline. So it was the 1950s that the wheat was hybridized. It was the 1970s that it went worldwide. So by the 1990s, every pasta, every pizza, every biscuit, cake, cookie, donut, cereal, bread, it's all made out of the hybridized wheat. You see, the farmers love it, and I don't blame them for loving it because they get 6 times more grain per acre. Who wouldn't like that? They've got to pay their bills. But as I mentioned yesterday, it was zoomed through to help with the starvation crisis in the world, and safety studies were never done. This explains the gluten intolerance that we see today. The 2 most common symptoms of a gluten intolerance is brain fog and bloating. I meet so many people that have brain fog and bloating, and they almost think it's normal, or it can be blamed on age. Poor old age gets blamed for so many things. Isn't that true? Now this Emma wheat, it also did a wild hybrid to come up with a field grass and came up with the spelt. So the spelt, it has retained the fairly fragile structure, and if that spelt meal is made into a sourdough bread, the culturing process in the sourdough bread breaks down that protein or gluten structure even more so that it now has the original structure of the Enkenhorn. If someone is celiac, they cannot have even the spelt. But if someone's gluten intolerant or gluten sensitive, they can usually handle the spelt, especially if it's made into a sourdough bread. One lady said, I don't like sourdough spelt bread. I said, well, you haven't tasted a good one. Please taste a few. Some are really good. So you have to investigate. I'm going to give you a website, and this is of a young man named Tristan. It's his family business, and he sells the most beautiful sourdough spelt, sourdough kamut bread. It's www.simpleneeds. And he ships all over. That's not right, that's needs. Sorry, and that's not right, it's a D. Simpleneeds.com. It is the most beautiful sourdough, spelt and kamut bread I have tasted. I think he has a rye, have a few different varieties. Some people order it on Friday, so when they get home on Monday, it's coming to their doorstep. It's already sliced, so it's very easy to put in the freezer and take a slice out now and then. So this explains what happened to the wheat. And if you'd like to pursue that a little bit more, you can get the book Wheat Belly. There's another book called Life Without Bread. Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, she also talks about the effect of the wheat on the gut and thus the brain. So there are a few books that talk about it. So coming back to our alkaline forming foods, the two nuts are your almond and Brazil. And all your seeds have an alkaline effect. So what has an acid effect? Before we go there, there's one other, is fruit. Now I've got a question mark with fruit too. Why have I got a question mark? If someone has a yeast presence in their body and they're eating a lot of fruit, the sugar in the fruit will feed the yeast. And as the yeast feeds on the sugars in the fruit, it gives off acetic acid. It gives off lactic acid. It gives off uric acid. So it basically is feathering its nest. So when a person has a yeast presence and they're eating a lot of fruit, can you see that they are feeding the problem? And they're creating the environment of 5.5 where yeast loves to live. And alcohol is also given off. Alcohol breaks down in the body to acetaldehyde. And acetaldehyde is a neurotoxin. We don't want a neurotoxin. A neurotoxin is a brain killer. There are 5 places you can be exposed to acetaldehyde. Yes, if someone consumes alcohol. Yes, if someone has a yeast problem and they're having a lot of fruit, it will break down to this. Cigarette smoke, car fumes give off acetaldehyde. And the last one is vinegar. We don't use vinegar here, we use lemon. Lemon is far superior. Let's have a look at acid-forming foods now. These acid-forming foods are high in the acid-forming minerals, which is phosphorus, sulfur, and chlorine. So what foods are high in phosphorus, sulfur, and chlorine? Meat. This explains why Dr. Colin Campbell found he could turn cancer cells on and off like a switch by the amount of meat and dairy products he was giving the rats. Refined sugar, it's very acid forming. The hybridized wheat, the hybridization of the wheat created a lot more of the acid forming minerals. Aged cheese, What's the blue in the blue vein cheese? The blue in the blue vein cheese is mould. So the only cheeses that don't sit under that category, the cheeses that have probably a pH of 7 would be your fresh. So that's your cottage, your ricotta. I'm not saying that they are okay, because usually they come from cows who have not been fed right or have chemicals in them. But on the pH scale, they're not as acid. Caffeine, all your caffeine foods and drinks have an acid effect. And of course, caffeine usually comes hand in hand with the sugar, which certainly ups it. And remember our 2.6 Coca-Cola, that's a combination of the caffeine and the sugar. Did you know that Coca-Cola is called Coca-Cola because I think it was in the early part of the 20th century they put cocaine in it. And then they went over to caffeine, which is just as dangerous. Alcohol is not a food, but it creates an acid environment in the body. Tobacco is not a food, but it also creates an acid environment in the body. All your other grains, other than the grains that sit on the alkaline side, all your other legumes, other than the lima, lentil and soy, and all your other nuts, other than the almond and Brazil, have an acid effect. To maintain the 6.5 environment, we need to be consuming 20% acid-forming foods and 80%, 70 to 80% alkaline-forming foods. And I'm sure you're not surprised to hear me say that the 20% should come from this section here. Mm-hmm. Yes, oatmeal is here. Yes, rice is here. They're not bad grains. We need a little acid. Yes, your chickpeas are here, and your garbanzos, your chickpeas, your black-eyed beans, your kidney beans. They're not bad. Of course they're not bad. We need a little acid. It's when the whole meal is acid that tips the scales. How many Americans would be eating 90% acid, 10% alkaline? Is that true? No wonder cancer and heart disease are neck to neck for the #1 killers in the world today. Far more people die from alcohol-related diseases. Far more people die from tobacco-related diseases. And yet they're not banning tobacco or alcohol, are they? That's why the deaths to COVID fade into insignificance against all of these. That's why God gave us a sound mind to assess these things. Are you familiar with the hydrangea plant? The hydrangea plant's a beautiful big bush, and it has big flowers, about this big, and each flower is made up of actually a whole lot of tiny little flowers. And sometimes you'll see a hydrangea plant with blue flowers, sometimes purple flowers, sometimes hot pink flowers, sometimes pale pink flowers. They're not different types of hydrangea plant. The gardener plays with the pH of the soil, because different pHs create different coloured flowers. There's a massage house in the town near us. Well, it's an hour away. We're from an hour from a town. And it's an old house that's been painted purple. And out the front they've got big hydrangea plants, and the purple is the same colour as the paint that painted their house. I'm wondering how long it took them to play with the pH of the soil just to get the right colour. Just as the gardener plays with the pH of the soil to get the right colour flower, you can play with the pH of your soil, cell, to create different health and sicknesses conditions in the body. One of the easiest ways to do it is eat more vegetables, eat more greens. Start pursuing the other grains. And little by little, without your family even realizing it, you can begin to create an alkaline environment in your family. When you go home, remember that everyone's going to be a little bit afraid of you because you've just been to a health retreat for a week, and they're going to think that you're going to knock them over the head with health. You know, the best thing to do is to say very little and just create the most beautiful food. And then when they say to you, all right, what have you done? You can say, I'm so glad you asked. Then you can speak. So you can see also with the blue zone, these people that live the long knife, they're eating a lot of fresh foods. If you cook the food, does it come acid? No. Whether it's cooked or whether it's raw, it doesn't change the mineral content of the food. The only time you will lose your minerals is if you cook your vegetables in water and throw the vegetable water away. Every evening we're giving you a broth and you're drinking all that vegetable water. It's very high in minerals. We're going to have a break now. When we come back from the break, we're going to look at fantastic fats.